Oprah asked her most personal question ever, live, in front of millions. But Keanu didn't blink. He didn't cry. He didn't even speak. What he did next left the entire world speechless. Keanu Reeves refused Oprah's final question. What happened next shocked everyone. This wasn't a meltdown. It was a masterclass in quiet strength. And it changed the way we see fame, forever. The letter arrived on a rainy Tuesday. It wasn't dramatic, just a clean white envelope with embossed gold writing. Keanu sat alone in his small kitchen, the only sound coming from the soft tapping of rain against the windowpane. He held the envelope for a moment, turning it over in his hands. He already knew who it was from. The Oprah Winfrey Show. Final season. Special guest invitation. He didn't smile. He didn't frown either. He simply opened it, scanned the neatly printed words, and placed the letter on the table. He poured another cup of tea, steam rising gently, and leaned back in his chair. For most people, it would be the invitation of a lifetime. A final sit-down with the queen of media herself. A career-defining spotlight. But for Keanu, it felt heavier than it should. Later that day, his friend David stopped by. David was one of the few people who'd known Keanu before the fame. Before the world knew his name, his tragedies, his silence. David glanced at the letter on the table. You got the call? Keanu nodded slowly. So, are you gonna do it? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he watched the rain slide down the glass, each droplet racing the next. It was a strange comfort, watching something fall without trying to stop it. They say it's a tribute, Keanu finally said. A career celebration. But we both know how these things go. David sat down across from him. He didn't push. He didn't try to convince. He just waited. You know what they'll ask, Keanu continued. It won't just be about the movies or the characters. It'll be about Jen, about Ava, about all the things that still keep me up at night. You don't have to answer anything you don't want to, David said carefully. That's the thing, Keanu replied. On shows like this, silence says more than words. And they know it. He stood up, walked to the window, and watched a car pass by slowly in the street below. But maybe it's time, he said quietly. Time for what? Time to remind people that healing isn't performance. For a moment, the room was quiet again. Keanu turned, a calm resolve settling in his eyes. I'll go, he said. But on my terms. A week later, he stood at the entrance of the studio. No entourage. No flashy suit. Just a quiet presence in a world built for noise. Studio assistants buzzed around him, offering water, touching up lighting, adjusting microphones. He accepted it all with a nod, never needing to say much. Oprah's producer approached with a smile too wide to trust. We're honored to have you, Mr. Reeves. Ms. Winfrey's really looking forward to this. She wants it to be raw, real, honest. Keanu looked him in the eyes and responded in his soft, steady voice. Honest doesn't mean invasive. Real doesn't mean reckless. The producer chuckled awkwardly. Of course. Of course. Inside, the stage was set. The audience packed. The cameras rolling. And as Keanu walked out to the applause, he knew something the rest of them didn't. He wasn't there to give them what they wanted. He was there to protect what they didn't deserve. The studio was colder than Keanu expected. Not just in temperature, but in energy. Beneath the applause and polished smiles, there was an unmistakable tension, like everyone knew something big was coming, but no one wanted to say it aloud. He took his seat across from Oprah. The chairs were angled perfectly, framed by soft lighting and a set designed to feel intimate yet grand. The applause faded as Oprah leaned in, greeting him with her trademark warmth. It's so good to finally have you here, Keanu. He nodded politely, offering a gentle smile. Thank you for having me. The interview began smoothly. They talked about his earliest roles, the surprise success of Speed, the philosophy behind The Matrix. The audience laughed as Oprah replayed a few of his most iconic movie clips. Keanu chuckled along, grateful to keep the conversation light. But he could feel it coming. There was a rhythm to interviews like this. A climb. A high point. And then, the descent into the personal. Into the past. Oprah shifted in her chair. "You've always had this mysterious calm about you," she said. "Even in tragedy. Even in chaos. Where does that come from?" Keanu's posture didn't change. He simply met her gaze and answered quietly. "Stillness helps me see things clearly. Reacting too quickly can blur the truth." Oprah nodded slowly, as if trying to read beyond the words. "You've dealt with more personal loss than most people could imagine," she continued. "Your best friend, River. Your daughter, Jennifer. Your sister's battle with leukemia. How do you carry all that and still show up to the world with so much peace?" He looked down for a second, as if weighing his next words. "I carry it by not pretending it doesn't exist. But also, by not offering it up for display." The room went quiet. "That's very powerful," Oprah said, her voice softer now. "But let me ask, don't you think sharing your pain could help others who are suffering?" Keanu didn't answer right away. He glanced at the audience. Some faces were sympathetic, others eager, waiting, hoping. He turned back to her. "Helping others is important. But not all healing needs an audience." The words settled like dust in the air. The conversation moved forward. Oprah asked about his work with children's hospitals, his secret donations, his quiet charity. The audience clapped again, touched by his humility. But something lingered, unspoken. Backstage, Oprah's producer watched from the control room, eyes darting between monitors. He leaned toward his headset. "She's going to push," he said. "Final segment. She's going for it." In the studio, Oprah reached for her final card. A simple white cue card with one handwritten sentence. This wasn't on the approved list. But it was the moment she'd planned all along. "We're coming to the end here," she said, with a practiced smile. "One last question, Keanu." He looked at her, knowing full well this was the moment everything would pivot. "If your daughter had lived, who do you think you would have been?" The question dropped like a stone in still water. The air tightened. You could hear a cough in the back row. A chair squeak. The distant hum of a camera motor. Keanu didn't speak. Not yet. The moment stretched. 10 seconds. Then 15. Time moved slowly in the silence. Oprah remained composed, her posture perfect, her eyes fixed on Keanu, waiting for a reaction. The audience was frozen, unsure whether to hold their breath or exhale. Keanu didn't shift. He didn't blink. He simply stared back at her, not with anger, not with pain, just presence. His hands rested calmly on his lap, his breathing even. But behind his eyes, something deep stirred. 1,000 memories. 1,000 moments never meant for anyone else. The question had pierced something sacred. Not because it was cruel, but because it was not hers to ask. In the booth above, producers exchanged looks. One of them whispered into a mic, "Should we cut to break?" The director shook his head. Not yet. This was gold, and they knew it. Back on stage, Oprah tried again, softening her voice. "You don't have to answer if you're not ready. I just thought, maybe the world could understand you more." Still, Keanu said nothing. But something was being said. Loudly. Powerfully. In that silence, every person in the audience began to feel what words couldn't express. The pain of losing a child. The ache of being forced to imagine what could have been. And the strength it took to sit with that question and not give in. After another pause, Keanu finally looked toward the audience. His eyes scanned the faces, not for approval, not for sympathy, but as if searching for someone who would simply understand. He leaned forward slightly, the first movement he'd made since the question. "What I lost, I carry every day," he said quietly. "And what she could have been, that's a question I ask myself in the silence of my own life. Not here. Not under lights." There was no applause. Just stillness. Some in the audience teared up. Others lowered their eyes. Even Oprah, so skilled at navigating the deepest emotions, seemed caught off guard. She placed the cue card gently on the table between them. "I respect that," she said. "Truly." But the damage had been done. Not damage to Keanu, he was unshaken. The damage was in what the show had tried to do. To turn grief into a moment. A headline. A viral clip. And yet, in refusing to play along, Keanu had given the world something far more powerful. A lesson in boundaries. A lesson in dignity. The interview wrapped up shortly after. Oprah thanked him for his honesty. The audience gave a standing ovation, though it felt subdued. Less of a celebration, more of a moment of reflection. Backstage, a young staff member handed Keanu a bottle of water. He thanked her with a small smile, then sat alone in the dressing room for a moment before leaving. No press. No after-show conversation. Just a man walking away from a moment that could have broken someone else. Outside, the evening air was crisp. A few fans waited quietly by the gate. One young woman held a sign that read, "Thank you for not giving them everything." He saw it. He nodded once. And then he disappeared into the night. He had said more with silence than most say in an entire lifetime on television. The clip of Keanu's silence hit the internet like a lightning strike. Within hours, it had been viewed by millions. Not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. The moment Oprah asked the question, and Keanu paused, breathed, and simply chose not to answer, those few seconds became the most talked-about silence of the year. It was everywhere. TikTok edits. YouTube shorts. Reaction videos. Podcasts. News segments. People dissected the pause like it was poetry. Some called it stoic. Some called it haunting. But almost all agreed, it was powerful. On Twitter, one user wrote, "That moment taught me more about boundaries than therapy ever did." Another tweeted, "He didn't walk off. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just said no with nothing but his eyes." That's strength. Meanwhile, media outlets scrambled to spin the story. Some praised him. Others criticized Oprah for pushing too far. A few defended her, saying it was her job to ask the hard questions. But what lingered with people wasn't the question. It was the refusal. For decades, celebrities had been trained to turn trauma into television. Pain sold. Vulnerability attracted viewers. And people, knowingly or not, had come to expect that trade. But Keanu shattered that expectation in 10 seconds of silence. He didn't need a speech. He didn't need to defend his privacy. His stillness was his answer. A few days later, Oprah addressed the moment in a behind-the-scenes podcast. Her tone was measured, but not defensive. "I've always believed in the power of open conversation," she said. "But that moment with Keanu, it reminded me that not all pain is meant for public healing. And not all silence is a wall. Sometimes, it's a form of wisdom." She paused. "I wanted something raw. What I got was something real. Just not in the way I expected." Meanwhile, Keanu continued his life as if nothing had happened. No statements. No interviews. No tweets. Just a quiet return to what he always did, working, giving, and disappearing when the cameras weren't needed. One evening, he was spotted at a small bookstore in Silver Lake. No security. No assistance. He browsed the shelves like any other man. A fan approached him hesitantly, holding a worn copy of a philosophy book. "You changed something last week," the fan said softly. "I didn't even realize how much I'd been oversharing my pain until I saw you not answer." Keanu looked at him, kind but steady. "Sometimes we heal better in silence," he said. The fan nodded. "Thank you." Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder for a moment. Then he turned back to the shelves. Back online, content creators began making videos titled "The Power of Saying Nothing and Keanu's Silence," a masterclass in boundaries. Therapists began referencing the moment in their sessions. Teachers played the clip in media literacy classes. One college professor even used it in a lecture called "Emotional Consent in the Digital Age." It was no longer just a TV moment. It had become a cultural checkpoint. In an era obsessed with exposure, one man had dared to withhold the most painful chapter of his life, and the world listened harder than ever. But the real impact was quiet, personal. A woman in her 40s who'd lost a child posted on Facebook, "Watching Keanu hold his silence with so much grace gave me permission to stop explaining my pain to people who never deserved the story." A high school boy wrote in a blog post, "Everyone always tells us to be vulnerable online. But Keanu showed me it's okay to keep parts of yourself sacred." What Oprah had tried to turn into a final crescendo had instead become a mirror, reflecting the uncomfortable truth that not all stories are for sale. That not every trauma needs a stage. And that dignity, when held firm, can ripple through the world like thunder in the distance. Keanu didn't plan it. He didn't try to make a statement. He just knew who he was. And when the world asked for more than he was willing to give, he answered with the one thing they didn't expect. Silence. And that silence changed everything. The following week, Keanu was back on set, filming a quiet independent drama in the outskirts of Vancouver. The crew worked around him respectfully. No one mentioned the interview. No one needed to. It had become a moment larger than television, yet he carried himself the same as always. Arriving early. Greeting the lighting guys by name. Sharing lunch with the stunt doubles. Calm. Grounded. Present. But the energy around him had shifted. Even strangers who had never watched a single Keanu Reeves movie now spoke of him with reverence. Not for his fame, not for his talent, but for the way he had held the line when the world expected him to break. The network tried to ride the wave. Oprah's team re-uploaded the episode with a new title, The Interview That Left Everyone Speechless. But the views didn't grow because of clever marketing. They grew because people were watching it again and again, searching for meaning in that silence. Producers scrambled to recreate the magic with other celebrities, probing deeper, pushing harder, but none of them responded the way Keanu did. Some gave in. Others got defensive. None left the same mark. That's when it hit people. Keanu's silence wasn't about resistance. It wasn't defiance. It was clarity. It was a man who knew himself well enough to not let the world shape his answers. One evening, Oprah received a handwritten letter. No return address. No fanfare. Just a folded note on cream paper. The handwriting was simple, honest. Thank you for the invitation. I hope the conversation helped someone. I don't blame you for the question. But I couldn't give you something I haven't finished understanding myself. Keanu. She read it twice. Alone in her home, surrounded by decades of interviews, awards, and recognition, she held that letter in her hands longer than she expected. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't praise. It was just truth. In that moment, even she had to admit, she'd underestimated him. Not as an actor, but as a man. Elsewhere, the story still moved through people like quiet wind. A single mother who'd been hounded by a reality TV crew trying to tell her inspiring story finally said no. A father grieving the loss of his teenage son stopped posting memorial videos, choosing instead to grieve privately. A young woman with anxiety deleted her vlog and wrote in her journal instead, finally understanding that healing wasn't meant to be packaged for content. No one credited Keanu directly. They didn't need to. His silence had become a symbol, permission to retreat, to preserve, to protect what the world too often tries to take. Back on set, a young production assistant approached him during a break. She hesitated before speaking. I watched the Oprah thing, she said. You didn't say much. But it meant a lot. Keanu gave her a warm, tired smile. Sometimes, saying less leaves more space for others to feel. The girl nodded. That makes sense. As the crew called them back to shoot the next scene, he stood, dusted off his coat, and walked into the frame. Just another man doing his work, living his life, carrying what he carries without needing to prove anything to anyone. And somewhere out there, someone who had never seen that interview, never watched Oprah, never even liked celebrity culture, felt a little more at peace with their own quiet story. Because sometimes, a whisper can echo louder than a scream. And sometimes, the loudest truths are the ones never spoken at all. Months passed. The world moved on, as it always does. New headlines, new scandals, new distractions. But the memory of that interview, the silence, the look in Keanu's eyes, the unshaken calm, didn't fade. It stayed, quietly echoing in places the cameras couldn't reach. In a culture addicted to confession, Keanu's moment became something sacred. People didn't talk about it loudly anymore. They whispered about it. They reflected on it. And slowly, it became less about the interview and more about what it meant. One evening, during a quiet red carpet event for a film premiere, a reporter leaned in and asked Keanu a question that had nothing to do with the movie. Do you think people misunderstood your silence? He smiled gently, eyes soft. I don't think they misunderstood it, he said. I think some people just weren't used to seeing it as an answer. And then he moved on. No need to explain. No need to correct. Just the same quiet dignity that had defined that unforgettable moment. In classrooms, professors now played that interview clip during ethics discussions. Not to shame Oprah. Not to praise Keanu blindly. But to ask, where do we draw the line between storytelling and invasion? Between curiosity and consumption? In therapy offices, counselors referenced it when guiding patients through boundaries. What Keanu did on that stage, without judgment, without anger, became a model for how to protect the most delicate parts of ourselves. At home, ordinary people made quieter choices. Someone turned down a podcast interview. Someone else stopped sharing their grief online. Not because they were ashamed, but because they realized they didn't owe the world every detail of their pain. In those silent acts, Keanu's moment lived on. One afternoon, while walking through a bookstore in New York, Keanu found himself in the philosophy section. A young man nearby recognized him but didn't say anything. Not until Keanu reached for a copy of Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. The young man smiled. "That book explains you," he said. Keanu raised an eyebrow, amused. "How so?" "Because Aurelius said, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. And yours must be made of silence and steel." Keanu chuckled, not dismissively, but with appreciation. "That's generous," he said. "I'm just trying to walk gently through a loud world." Later that night, he returned to his apartment. No noise, no headlines, no applause. Just the soft hum of the city below his window. He sat down, opened the book, and read a passage slowly to himself. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. The light above his chair flickered slightly, then settled. Outside, traffic passed. Life moved forward. But inside that room, inside that soul, was something the world hadn't broken. Something it had tried to reach, tried to take, but failed. Not because he fought back with rage or speeches or staged defiance. But because he had drawn a line in silence. And kept it. The story didn't end with a viral clip or a trending hashtag. It ended exactly where it began, with a man choosing peace over performance, truth over spectacle, and depth over display. And somewhere, far from the noise, someone else sat with their own pain and thought of him, not as a movie star, not as a hero, but as a reminder. That you don't owe your wounds to the world. That you can live with grace in the quiet. And that silence, when chosen with strength, can echo for a lifetime. If this story moved you, if Keanu's silence said more to you than 1,000 interviews ever could, then take a moment to breathe. Because in a world that demands noise, your peace is rebellion. Tap like if you believe not everything needs to be shared. Hit subscribe if you're tired of fake drama and crave real, human truth. And share this video with someone who's been carrying something quietly, just to remind them. You don't have to explain your pain to be strong. Stay grounded. Stay real. And remember, sometimes, silence is the loudest message of all.